What would one do if there was a troubled person in the family? Even if one wants to support and help because that person is family. What if that person betrays those intentions? It would be fortunate if such a thing never happened, but in case it does, I want to leave a note here for future reference. My name is Kathy. That day, the weather was nice and warm. So I was sitting on the sofa and started dozing off, dreaming in a light sleep. Mom, I'm quitting piano lessons. Music is meant to be listened to, not played. I'm such a klutz. You've only started a month ago. Are you quitting so soon again, Jim? You really never stick to anything. This scene is a conversation between my brother Jim and our mother. In a shallow sleep, I was aware that it was a dream world. Based on this conversation, my dream shifted to reminiscences. We are a family of 4, my parents, my younger brother, and me. Jim, for years younger than me, was much adored by our parents who had longed for a boy after having a girl. They indulged his every wish, which might not have been the best approach to parenting. If successful, it might foster independence and a spirit of exploration into the unknown realms of curiosity, opening up possibilities. However, it might also result in a personality that lacks patience, quickly losing interest and abandoning things. Jim clearly displayed the negative effects of such parenting. Unable to endure or exercise self-control, he developed a pathological sense of omnipotence, believing he could do anything. His interest in various activities, while initially positive, quickly faded. He didn't realize that his failures were his own doing, always rationalizing that there were better things he should be doing. For piano, he rationalized that music was meant to be listened to, not played. For Spanish classes, he thought Spanish was unnecessary in the States since he had no plans to go abroad. For swimming, he complained that getting wet was bothersome since human beings are meant to live on land. When he joined a volunteer activity, he felt he should be on the receiving end, not the giving. Jim was always quick to abandon his endeavors, initially convincing our parents with seemingly plausible reasons. For instance, he was enlightened by the beauty of music when starting piano lessons, wanting to create such sounds himself. He claimed that Spanish was essential for the future when starting Spanish lessons. However, when he quit, his reasons starkly contradicted his initial words. I wonder if he remembered the words he said just a month ago. Our parents tried to reason with him, but to no avail. Experiencing various things has shaped me, so it's all good. I'll find something truly suited for me eventually, so this is just a stepping stone. Jim said this confidently, but mere tasting of experiences isn't enough to call them experiences. Whether one truly finds something they can devote themselves to depends on how seriously they've engaged with things until then. However, skimming the surface and flitting from one thing to another, one cannot expect to find their true calling. Jim's problematic traits were also evident at school. At the start of the school year in September, he was full of confidence, proclaiming, "My true ability is about to be revealed. I'll be top in every subject because that's who I am." I felt like asking, "So what if it's you?" However, by mid-November, he'd start saying, "This isn't really for me. I have more important things to focus on." His motivation quickly dwindled, and he began avoiding school and homework altogether. Despite our parents' strictness about skipping school, Jim's reluctance only grew. Initially eager and confident, he quickly faced the harsh reality of not being able to keep up with his studies and started making excuses to escape. By the second term, after a cool-down during the winter, he regained some baseless confidence. But by mid-February, he regressed to negativity. This cycle repeated each term. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for academic performance to improve. And the period until Jim's motivation started to wane grew shorter each year. This meant that the periods during which he did not want to attend school became longer. My parents and I spent more and more time trying to coax and sometimes scold him into going to school. As time went by and the end of middle school approached, Jim managed to scrape into a commercial high school in the region. The school that accepted me is lucky. They should feel honored that I chose them. It's baffling how he could think that way. Jim, brimming with confidence and enthusiasm for his upcoming high school life, made my parents and me sigh, as we could easily predict what was to come. Upon entering high school, for reasons unknown, Jim decided to run for class president. I must lead these low performers. It's my duty as an outstanding individual. He seemed aware that his school was at the bottom tier. Yet he failed to see that he was part of that same group. I thought it was an impossible task for Jim, but as it turned out, he was elected, simply because there were no other candidates. No one else wanted the burdensome task of being class president. Yet, Jim proclaimed, the stage is set for the chosen one to shine. It's time for me to unleash my true power. But as expected, within a month and a half, Jim's attitude changed. What's the point of moving for these fools? I should have been guiding them, not working alongside them. I've learned from this mistake, but well, it was a good experience. With his lazy classmates unwilling to help, Jim quickly became nothing more than a minion rather than a leader. Realizing this, he soon lost all motivation and began to neglect his duties. Lacking the skills to invigorate the class and the drive to involve others, Jim started skipping committee meetings without notice. This led to a lack of necessary information distribution in the class, and obvious disparities in information compared to other classes. Teachers tried to guide him, but he evaded their advice, and his classmates bombarded him with complaints. Eventually, Jim was stripped of his presidential role in a class meeting, which he merely scoffed at. This attitude led to immediate isolation from both classmates and teachers. These lowlives are just trying to blame me to feel better about their incompetence. I'm not like them. Staying away is the right choice. Jim's loss of interest in high school studies and events meant it wouldn't have been surprising if he had mentioned dropping out at any point. If he quit high school, his future would be in jeopardy. So my parents and I worked together to keep him enrolled. However, this required much more effort than during middle school. We resorted to threats, praise, and even tears to keep him engaged. In the beginning of his senior year, Jim suddenly decided to start a part-time job. Society is waiting for my talents. It's unbearable to make them wait until I graduate. So I'll start making a difference now. His reasoning was unclear, but we hoped that a shift in focus might prevent him from quitting. However, we were deeply concerned that he might cause trouble. Unfortunately, our fears materialized. Jim started working at a local store. According to the manager, he felt a hint of unease during Jim's overly confident job interview. However, due to a staff shortage, the manager overlooked these concerns and hired him. Initially, Jim went to his job with enthusiasm, but as expected, his attitude changed within a month. Lacking the ability to listen, he barely understood his job duties. For instance, when stocking perishable goods, he ignored the method of placing items close to their expiration date at the front, and those with more time at the back, merely shoving items onto the shelves and increasing waste. During expiration date checks, his lack of attention caused him to overlook items that needed to be removed. Despite repeated explanations, he could not grasp how to operate the register and was relegated to cleaning duties, which he did begrudgingly. His frequent tardiness and unexcused absences soon followed. Just when the store manager was about to throw in the towel, Jim did something unbelievable. He took sweets and sandwiches that had been removed from the shelves after their expiration dates had passed, and he either ate them or took them home without permission. Although these items were removed for disposal, the store still owned them, and taking them constituted theft. The manager's patience ran out, and Jim was fired. And the fact was reported to our parents. They apologized profusely to the manager, compensating for the items Jim had taken, thus narrowly avoiding police involvement. It's just going to be thrown away, so what's the big deal? You don't understand that I'm thinking about the environment. Jim didn't grasp the seriousness of his actions, which infuriated our father for the first time. Having never been yelled at by him before, Jim was initially shocked, blinking in disbelief. However, moments later, he began to rant, still not understanding why he was being scolded. Perhaps this rebuke had some impact, as afterward, he started attending high school more regularly. Jim was considering employment after graduating from high school, but our father persuaded him to pursue university instead. He thought that Jim was not yet ready to join society, but Jim said, "So, you think I should become more competent by studying at university?" Well, yeah, getting a job now would indeed be a loss to society. Indeed, it would be a loss, but not for the reasons Jim believed. Our father wanted to spend the next 4 years making Jim even slightly more presentable before letting him out into society. It was tough finding a university that Jim could potentially pass into, but eventually, he managed to become a university student. However, the year Jim started university, our mother suddenly passed away from an illness. My father and I were engulfed in grief and suffered significant emotional damage. But Jim remained eerily calm. I thought he was composed because he was trying to act mature. But he said, everyone goes to the other side eventually. It's not a big deal that the noisy mother is gone. Dad could have gone too. Oh, but it's bad that we've lost someone who was earning money. He said this nonchalantly to me. I'll never forget the shock, dismay, and anger I felt at that moment. Kathy, what are you sleeping for? You have it easy. Jim's voice woke me up, and I returned from a long, dreamlike reflection to reality. I've quit university. To think I stayed there for 2 years, I should praise myself. His outrageous statement completely woke me up. What are you doing quitting on your own? What do you plan to do now? I asked. Society is calling for me. They're telling me to come quickly. And you, Kathy, you graduated from university about a year ago, right? You worked for a while, but now you're just a shut-in, aren't you? Society doesn't need you, unlike me. As Jim mentioned, I had graduated from university and worked for a company. But I had resigned a year ago. I'm doing fine. But what about you, dropping out of university? What are you going to do? I retorted. I'll work, of course. I'll thrive where my abilities are needed. Knowing this, our father was furious, but Jim remained unconcerned. As the word reflection didn't seem to exist in his dictionary. From then on, Jim began his life as a job hopper. It's easy to understand what job hopping means. He would get a job, but within a month, he would quit. His reasons varied, like the job didn't suit him. He was bored with meaningless work, he disliked his boss, the pay was too low. The work was uninteresting, and so on. He would get a job, quit after a month, loaf around for a month or two. And then repeat the process. In a year, which is 12 months, he would cycle through 4 to 5 different jobs. His resume became so full of short stints that it would have astounded and exasperated anyone who saw it. After continuing this for a year or two, Jim suddenly announced he was getting married. I need to settle down. It's only natural for a working adult. What are you talking about? You haven't even established yourself as a working adult. How will you live? Your job isn't stable. Don't worry. We'll live here, so no rent, and Maggie is working, so it's fine. I'll find a job soon enough. I'll find something suitable eventually. But Kathy, you should worry about yourself, still being a shut-in. I'm much better off. Jim had forcibly married a woman named Maggie, and the two of them moved into our house. My father was too exhausted to say anything. But they took his silence as approval and started living there as if it was their own. My new sister-in-law, Maggie, was just like Jim. She had a job but was utterly unreliable at work, with tardiness and absenteeism being the norm. At the slightest issue, she would abandon her job and go out. Birds of a feather flock together, indeed. Since you're just a shut-in, I'll leave all the housework to you. You can at least be useful in that way. Both Jim and I are busy, you know. I'm not a shut-in. You two are hardly in a position to say you're working. You two should really think about your future and plan your actions carefully. Sure. You've got your pride, don't you, Kathy? You're not a shut-in, just unemployed. So I'm counting on you to take care of the household chores. Jim and Maggie, who constantly behaved as they pleased and looked down on me, were a real handful. During this time, our father had an accidental fall, hitting his head and ending up in the hospital. He survived, but the accident caused some paralysis in his limbs due to the aftereffects, which was an unexpected misfortune. It's hopeless, isn't it? He can't work like this. Lame. Instead of worrying about our father. These two disrespectful individuals made such heartless comments. I found myself needing to care for our father in addition to managing the household chores. Yet Jim and Maggie did not help with his care at all. Even when I suggested they at least help with the household chores, they said, "Taking care of an old man is just too much. Plus, I'm busy. You're the idle one, so you should handle it. We can't live if Maggie and I don't earn money. You're not just leeching off us, but you should at least do the housework and caregiving." I swallowed the words, "You're the ones leeching off us." Both of them had jobs, but never held them long, earning just pocket change. Despite that, how could they possibly think they were supporting our household? Jim would quit jobs as soon as he started them, and Maggie, who also neglected her duties, earned very little. I was overwhelmed with housework and caring for our father. After about a year of this life, Jim and Maggie came to me to discuss something. "Kathy, you always said we should plan our lives better, right? Well, we've thought about it. And we've planned that it's time for you to move out of the house. I'm pregnant, so it's even more reason for you to leave. Honestly, an unemployed and shut-in like you is just in the way." Wait a minute. What are you suddenly talking about? That's incredibly selfish. What about Dad's care? Are you going to handle it properly? You take Dad with you. We can't handle caregiving. We'll live here just the two of us, so don't worry. Parasites taking over the host was exactly what this was, but I remained calm. I had already discussed such a scenario with my father, hoping it wouldn't come to this, but considering it a possibility. They thought they were being strategic. But my father and I had been far more methodical in our planning. My father and I decided to leave the house together. When we left, Jim and Maggie celebrated. But I wondered how long they could maintain their arrogance. 2 months later, I received a call from Jim. I had expected this call and answered my phone gracefully. Panic was evident in their voices. The real estate agent told us to leave because they've bought the property. This is troubling. I can't find a job. I used to get jobs easily, but now no one will hire me. I got fired. I used to be late or absent, and they tolerated it. But now they say they don't need to anymore. What's that about? Jim had found jobs easily because of our father's influence. Our father was a well-known figure locally, always taking care of others. And many were grateful to him. Thanks to his requests, Jim had been hired. Even so, he always quickly quit any job he started, and our father had to apologize to everyone. But recently, he realized that his help hadn't actually been benefiting Jim. So he stopped all his efforts to secure jobs for him. With a resume full of short-lived jobs and unable to properly answer interview questions, who would hire him? Regarding the house, after we left, my father sold the property. Even if we had let Jim and Maggie stay, they wouldn't have been able to pay the property taxes. The sale proceeds went towards my father's entry into a care facility. I had no issue caring for my father, but he insisted that was for my future. As for me, I was not a layabout or a shut-in. I had worked at a design company after graduating from university, having always been interested in design and having studied it on my own. Although I was there only for a year, I gained practical experience and established connections with clients, which led me to resign and start my own business. It was tough at first, but I built trust with my clients and now earn more than enough. Interestingly, one of my major clients had been Maggie's employer. Despite her poor work ethic, she had not been fired because of my influence, though she likely never realized this. Naturally, I informed the client that my relationship with Maggie had ended, and asked them to proceed according to their policies going forward. Upon learning everything, the two panicked. But I simply said goodbye, hung up, and blocked their calls. They ended up unemployed and lost their home, moving into a cheap apartment that they couldn't afford for long. Troubled by Maggie's supposed pregnancy? Well, it turned out to be a complete lie. Perhaps just to justify making me leave. Did they think that would unsettle me? Without jobs, the two of them grew desperate and responded to dubious job offers on social media, which led to their arrest on fraud charges. The penalty for fraud can be decades in prison. In cases of complex fraud, especially severe penalties can be expected. Even without prior convictions, participating unconsciously in a fraud scheme often leads to actual prison time. As expected, both received a sentence of 8 years without the possibility of parole. Imprisonment means they are confined to prison, where they are made to work. So, despite Jim's tendency to quit jobs quickly, he will now be in a work environment for up to 8 years. With meals and a place to sleep provided, a small relief, perhaps. My father entered a care facility, and thanks to the high sale price of the house, he could afford a high-quality place, ensuring his life faces no disruptions. I rented a new place and have thrown myself into my design work. Freed from the time constraints of housework and caregiving, I can focus fully on my career. The unexpected turn of my family members into criminals was unforeseen, but fortunately, it has not affected my work. Looking forward, I aim to live a life true to myself, potentially meeting a partner. Thinking about this makes me quite excited.